Imagine a garden teeming with life, yet completely untouched by destructive pests. No harsh chemicals, no constant vigilance. Sounds impossible, right? Prepare to have your mind blown as we unearth ancient secrets that allowed our ancestors to cultivate abundant gardens naturally for thousands of years. You'll be amazed by how simple and effective these forgotten techniques truly are, and how perfectly they align with what modern science is only now beginning to understand about ecological balance. Unearthing ancient garden secrets. Our ancestors didn't have access to synthetic pesticides, yet they managed to feed civilizations, build empires, and create legendary gardens that still inspire us thousands of years later. The hanging gardens of Babylon, the agricultural systems of ancient Rome, the chinampas of Mesoamerica, and the terraced gardens of Asia all thrived without a single chemical intervention. This wasn't luck or divine intervention. It was sophisticated understanding of ecological principles that modern industrial agriculture essentially abandoned in favor of chemical shortcuts that seemed miraculous at first, but have created cascading problems we're still grappling with today. The fundamental difference between ancient and modern pest management approaches comes down to perspective. Ancient gardeners understood that pests are symptoms of imbalance rather than standalone problems requiring direct elimination. When aphids appeared, experienced gardeners didn't just ask, "How do I kill aphids?" but rather, "Why are aphids thriving here, and what imbalance in my garden ecosystem is allowing this?" This diagnostic approach led to solutions that addressed root causes, rather than temporarily suppressing symptoms, creating gardens that became more resilient over time, rather than more dependent on interventions. The wisdom we've lost isn't about specific recipes or magic plants. It's about understanding gardens as living ecosystems that can be guided toward health rather than battlefields requiring constant warfare. The power of proactive prevention. Companion planting represents one of the most sophisticated examples of ancient agricultural wisdom, though it's often reduced to oversimplified advice like, plant marigolds near tomatoes. The Three Sisters garden, developed by indigenous peoples of North America, demonstrates the depth of ecological thinking that informed traditional growing systems. Corn provides structural support for climbing beans, beans fix atmospheric nitrogen that feeds the corn and squash leaves create living mulch that suppresses weeds while their spiny stems deter raccoons and other mammals from reaching the corn. This isn't just companion planting, it's architectural design, nutrient management, and pest control integrated into a single system that produces more food per square foot than any of the crops would yield grown separately. Beyond the Three Sisters, ancient gardeners developed region-specific companion systems based on, centuries of observation. Mediterranean gardeners interplanted aromatic herbs like rosemary, oregano, and lavender throughout their vegetable plots, not just for harvest, but because these plants' volatile oils confuse pest insects' ability to locate their target crops. The strong scents essentially create an olfactory maze that makes it difficult for cabbage moths to find brassicas, or tomato hornworm moths to locate their namesake plants. Chinese farmers traditionally planted alliums like garlic and onions in circular patterns around other crops, creating living barriers that repel many soft-bodied insects while attracting beneficial predators. These weren't superstitions but refined techniques developed through patient observation of what actually worked, generation after generation. Soil health occupied the central position in ancient pest management strategies because experienced gardeners recognized that healthy plants growing in living soil simply don't attract pests the way stressed, nutrient-deficient plants do. Ancient composting practices from cultures around the world share remarkable similarities despite being developed independently. They all emphasize diversity of materials, proper moisture management, and sufficient time for complete decomposition. Roman agricultural texts describe composting methods nearly identical to modern hot composting, though they framed the process in terms of balancing the four elements rather than carbon-to-nitrogen ratios. The outcome was identical: finished compost, teeming with beneficial organisms that colonized plant roots and protected them from pathogens, while making nutrients available in balanced forms that produce steady, healthy growth, rather than the explosive, pest-attracting growth that high-nitrogen synthetic fertilizers can trigger. Strategic garden placement based on understanding microclimates and natural patterns provided another layer of pest resistance that required no ongoing effort once implemented correctly. Ancient gardeners positioned pest-susceptible crops like brassicas in areas with good air circulation, recognizing that fungal diseases thrive in stagnant, humid conditions, even if they couldn't name the specific pathogens involved. Sun-loving Mediterranean vegetables were positioned where they'd receive maximum light and heat, producing plants with thicker cell walls and higher concentrations of defensive compounds that made them less palatable to insects. Shade-tolerant crops received protection from afternoon sun that would stress them and make them vulnerable, while wind patterns were harnessed to make gardens inhospitable to weak-flying insects like whiteflies that struggle against even modest breezes. These placement decisions were often encoded in traditional garden designs and folk wisdom that modern gardeners might dismiss as aesthetic preferences when they actually represent sophisticated pest management embedded in the landscape itself. Historical remedies you can use today. Plant-based pest repellents documented in ancient texts from cultures worldwide reveal that our ancestors had extensive pharmacopoeias for garden protection that worked through multiple mechanisms. Garlic and hot pepper sprays appear independently in European, Asian, and American traditional practices, suggesting they were discovered and rediscovered because, well, they genuinely work. The mechanism is straightforward. These plants produce defensive compounds to protect themselves from being eaten, and when we extract and apply those compounds to other plants, we're essentially borrowing one plant's defense system to protect another. Ancient recipes typically involved crushing or fermenting the repellent plant material in water for several days to weeks, creating solutions that combined the active compounds with fermentation products that added their own protective benefits through beneficial bacteria that colonize leaf surfaces and outcompete pathogens. Wormwood, tansy, and rue were cultivated in European monastery gardens specifically for pest control purposes, with detailed instructions surviving in medieval horticultural texts about how to prepare infusions and where to apply them. These weren't gentle deterrents but potent botanical pesticides that ancient gardeners understood could harm beneficial insects if used carelessly, so applications were targeted and timed strategically. Neem extracts appear in ancient Indian agricultural texts, with specific guidance about harvest timing to maximize the concentration of azadirachtin, the primary insecticidal compound. This level of sophistication challenges the notion that ancient pest control was simply about planting a few herbs and hoping for the best. These were carefully developed systems with detailed technical knowledge passed down through generations of practice. Physical barriers and mechanical pest control methods reached impressive levels of ingenuity in ancient gardens despite limited materials. Ash and diatomaceous earth rings around plants to deter slugs and soft-bodied insects appear in Roman, Chinese, and Mesoamerican sources, indicating widespread recognition of how abrasive materials damage pests with soft exteriors. Sticky traps made from tree sap or rendered animal fat applied to boards or branches captured flying insects, with ancient texts specifying optimal trap colors for different pest species. Yellow for whiteflies and aphids, red for apple maggot flies, showing that ancient gardeners understood pest color preferences that modern science has only quantified relatively recently. Copper barriers for slugs described in ancient texts work through the same electrochemical mechanism that modern copper slug tape employs, proving that effective technology doesn't require modern manufacturing. You know, the ancient practice of encouraging beneficial predators and parasites is perhaps one of the most sophisticated aspects of traditional pest management. It requires a deep understanding of insect life cycles and ecological relationships. For instance, Egyptian farmers would allow certain wildflowers to bloom along field margins. This was specifically to support populations of predatory wasps and hoverflies, whose larvae consume aphids voraciously. And, get this, Roman viticulturists cultivated specific herbs near grapevines to attract parasitic wasps. These wasps would lay eggs inside grape moth larvae, effectively using biological control centuries before the term was even invented. Traditional Japanese farmers went a step further by building small ponds near rice paddies. These ponds supported frog populations that patrolled for insect pests, while also attracting dragonflies. Their nymphs are aquatic predators, and the adults hunt flying insects. These weren't just happy accidents, folks. They were intentional ecological engineering designed to maintain predator populations that would naturally keep pest populations below damaging thresholds. Moving beyond the garden, crop rotation stands out as perhaps the single most important ancient pest management strategy. Yet, it's frequently neglected in modern home gardens where convenience and aesthetics often override pest management considerations. Ancient agricultural systems, from Rome to China to the Americas, all developed sophisticated rotation systems. These systems move crops to different locations each growing season, preventing the buildup of soil-borne pathogens and interrupting pest life cycles. The principle is elegantly simple. Many pests and diseases specialize in specific plant families. So, when you plant tomatoes in the same location year after year, populations of tomato-specific problems accumulate in that soil and on overwintering structures nearby. Moving tomatoes to a different area breaks that cycle, forcing pests to find their host plants anew each year, which many fail to do successfully. Ancient rotations often followed 3 to 7 year cycles, far longer than the typical home garden's 1 or 2 year rotation, providing even more effective pest suppression. Garden hygiene practices emphasized in ancient texts reveal an understanding that diseased plant material and pest-harboring debris serve as reservoirs for future problems if left in place. Roman agricultural writer Columella, for example, provided detailed instructions about removing and destroying diseased vines rather than composting them. He recognized that some pathogens survive composting and will reinfect future crops. Traditional practices included end-of-season garden clearing where all remaining plant material was either composted thoroughly, burned, or buried deeply, eliminating overwintering sites for pests and disease spores. This wasn't obsessive cleanliness but strategic sanitation targeting specific problems. Healthy plant material was returned to the soil as mulch or compost, while anything showing disease symptoms was removed from the garden ecosystem entirely. Modern gardeners who allow diseased tomato foliage or squash, vine borer-infested stems to remain in gardens over winter, essentially create ideal conditions for those problems to return with even greater intensity the following season. Observational skills formed the foundation of all ancient pest management success, requiring gardeners to develop intimate familiarity with their plants' normal appearance and behavior so that subtle changes indicating emerging problems could be detected early. Ancient texts emphasize daily garden walks where plants are inspected carefully, not just glanced at, with specific instructions to examine leaf undersides, growing tips, and soil surfaces where early signs of pest or disease problems first become visible. This vigilant observation allowed interventions while problems were still minor. Removing a single leaf with a cluster of pest eggs prevents an infestation, while waiting until damage is obvious means populations have already exploded beyond easy control. The skill being cultivated wasn't just pest identification, but pattern recognition, understanding what healthy plants look like in different growth stages and environmental conditions so that deviations from health become immediately obvious. Cultivating a resilient future garden, the synthesis of ancient wisdom with modern understanding creates pest management approaches that are simultaneously more effective and less labor-intensive than either system alone. We now understand the scientific mechanisms behind traditional practices, allowing us to refine them for even better results while avoiding the occasional traditional practice that doesn't withstand scientific scrutiny. Companion planting becomes more powerful when we understand allelopathy, volatile organic compounds, and predator-prey population dynamics rather than simply following traditional pairings by rote. Physical barriers can be optimized when we understand pest life cycles and behavior patterns. Botanical sprays become more effective when we extract and apply them using methods that maximize active compound concentration and stability. The long-term benefits of ancient pest management approaches, they really compound over time, rather than diminishing like chemical interventions that just breed resistant pest populations. Gardens managed ecologically actually become progressively easier to maintain as beneficial insect populations establish themselves, soil biology develops complexity and resilience, and plants adapted to local conditions prove their vigor. This is the opposite trajectory from chemical-dependent gardens, which often require escalating intervention levels as pests develop resistance and beneficial organisms are eliminated, creating ecosystems that are, well, increasingly unstable and reliant on human management. The initial investment of time learning and implementing ecological approaches pays dividends for decades, while chemical shortcuts create dependencies that never end and often intensify. Starting implementation doesn't require transforming your entire garden overnight or mastering complex techniques immediately. Begin with one or two ancient practices that resonate with your situation and interests. Maybe this year you implement a proper crop rotation plan, or you create habitat for beneficial insects along your garden's edges, or you start making botanical pest sprays from plants you're already growing. Observe what happens, refine your approach based on results, and gradually expand to additional practices as you gain confidence and see results. The beauty of these methods is that they're cumulative. Each practice you adopt makes your garden more resilient, creating conditions that allow additional practices to work even better, building momentum toward a truly self-regulating garden ecosystem that requires less intervention over time rather than more. Ancient gardeners didn't have the luxury of running to a garden center for chemical fixes, so they developed approaches that actually solved problems rather than temporarily suppressing symptoms. We have the opportunity to reclaim that wisdom, not because we're nostalgic for the past, but because these methods create healthier gardens, reduce our workload, save money, and align with our values about sustainability and environmental stewardship. Every ancient technique you implement is a vote for a different kind of gardening. One that works with nature rather than against it, that builds resilience rather than dependence, and that connects us with thousands of years of human experience cultivating abundance from the soil. Ready to transform your approach to pest management by tapping into wisdom that sustained civilizations for millennia? Share which ancient technique you're most excited to try and what pest challenges you're hoping to address in the comments below. I want to hear about your experiments and results. Subscribe to the Living Soil Lab for more strategies that bridge ancient wisdom with modern understanding, creating gardens that are productive, resilient, and increasingly self-regulating. Share this guide with fellow gardeners who are ready to move beyond the chemical treadmill and discover that the most effective pest control has been available for thousands of years, just waiting to be remembered and applied.